Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you all here to this session that we have for the next hour, which we will be considering the results of a 5-year conservation agriculture project. Probably one of the most significant projects in recent times, gathering over 80,000 data points. I'm joined up here with collaborators in the project. I have Belinda Bailey, who's going to present you the results, Andy Barr, who is one of the farmers involved in the trials. But first and foremost, I'm going to lead out with Gottlieb Basch here. I've known Gottlieb for about 25 years. We've been on a long journey developing conservation agricultural techniques. Gottlieb is the president of the European Conservation Agricultural Federation, which brings together the conservation agricultural organizations of Europe in sharing knowledge and experience. And I think that organization, if I may say so, Gottlieb, has been fantastic in allowing us to develop conservation agriculture. Gottlieb is well versed in this subject, and if you want to know exactly what, look in your brochure because it's well written out there. So with no more ado, I'm going to hand over to Gottlieb to give us a bit of background on conservation agriculture, why it's important, and what is significant about it for farming going forward in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the organizers to invite us. Well, we are part of the project. We also performed some trials, field trials, on-farm field trials in Spain within this project, although the results that will be presented are not the Spanish results, but they are very much in line with the results that we will see here from UK. Well, regarding conservation agriculture, I think, and we believe this now for more than 22 years, the European Conservation Agriculture was founded in '99, starting with 6 member associations, and now we grew all over Europe up to 19 member associations. So the family is growing, and hopefully also the area under conservation agriculture. We know and estimate now the area throughout Europe at about 6% of the cropland is under conservation agriculture, including some areas, or quite some areas in southern Europe in permanent crops, because you can do conservation agriculture also in permanent crops. Well, I think you are all very familiar with the main principles of conservation agriculture, with it, which is minimum soil disturbance, which is permanent soil cover, either through crop residues, through cover crops, living mulches, and so on, and also the need for crop diversification through rotation, mainly, but also through cover crops, companion crops, intercropping, and so on. So this is, and these principles do have their reason to be part of a sustainable agriculture approach, because they help us to improve soil health, to protect soil, and well, to address the main soil threats that we know they exist. Well, in Europe, unfortunately, soil was for long not considered a natural resource that needed to be protected. Well, it only started in 2002. There was built this soil advisory forum to come up with a huge report on soil health and soil threats in Europe. And there we, well, they first recognized that there were huge problems. One of them, of course, soil erosion, soil organic matter decline, compaction, decline in soil biodiversity, and so on. And we think that conservation agriculture can address all these threats. Well, we know, and today soil is in the foreground, and also climate change to some extent, also biodiversity. And we feel and know and have both scientific and empiric experience and results that confirm that the principles of conservation agriculture are capable to address all these challenges. Especially when it comes to climate change. Well, we all know that climate change happens. We all feel eventually more in some regions than in others in Europe, that we have more erratic and severe weather events, drought spells, heavy rainfall events, and so on. And well, there was recently a joint research council, it's called, well, GRC modeling exercise that even, or despite a reduction in arable land in Europe, and despite a change in land use more to grazing systems, erosion will still increase in Europe. Why? Because the rainfall events will be more severe. The erosivity of the rainfall will increase. So if there were no measures taken to reduce this, then erosion would still increase. Climate change, climate action. All talk about climate action. Well, and we well know what it is. It's both mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation would mean to either remove carbon dioxide from the air, or at least to avoid emissions. So, and in this sense, I think, and the results will show that we were capable to sequester the carbon dioxide in the form of soil organic carbon in the soil by doing conservation agriculture. And as well important is adaptation. How can farmers adapt to climate change? First of all, they have to well, do something to avoid erosion, to the risk of erosion, and also the lack of water. It's extremely important. And for that to improve water use efficiency, we need to improve water intake into the soil. We need to improve the retention of water in the soil, and we also need to avoid losses. But losses not by runoff, but by evaporation. And yesterday we presented a report in the European Parliament where we presented results also of a study we carried out over the last 2 years. And conservation agriculture, if you have the soil covered, you can reduce evaporation, water evaporation by up to 50%. I myself ran a field trial in Portugal where I could save 2,000 cubic meters per hectare of irrigation water doing irrigated corn under no-till with a thick mulch layer protecting the water from evaporation. So this is really crucial, and especially when it comes to farmers and how they can build up resilience. Well, first of all, the first thing is to improve soil health. And soil health is mainly based on reducing or improving the buildup of soil organic matter. It's to leave the soil covered, and soil means to be covered. It's like a blanket that provides protection, not only for the soil, but also for the soil living organisms. It provides food, and of course, it prevents erosion. And to some extent also compaction. Then it also, conservation agriculture means to reduce risks. First of all, to reduce risks, we need to reduce costs. If we have less costs, the risk is less. And reducing the costs is reducing machinery, reducing operational costs, and improve soil fertility, allowing for reducing fertilization inputs. And also through the concept of crop rotation and crop diversity, we reduce drastically the need for other external inputs, namely pesticides. And we have well, nice stories from Denmark showing clearly that they who does conservation agriculture for over many years now is hardly using any more insecticides and much less fungicides. And even weed control can be improved using soil cover and all the other principles of conservation agriculture. But I think I stop here. I already talked too much. Sorry.
I think you've set the scene absolutely fantastically there. You know, the challenges are there before us. And what I'm hoping now is that Belinda's going to present us with some of the solutions, some of the science from this project, which is addressing those exact issues which you have raised. The science behind this is really an important thing. There's a lot of information out there, quite a lot of it at this show, which is not backed up by science. And I think, you know, when we're trying to help farmers to make this journey, being able to give them confidence in the results is really important. So, Belinda, there is the challenge. How well have we got on in addressing that? And once Belinda is finished, I'm going to open the floor up to all of you for at least 30 minutes of questions from the floor. So be thinking about what you might want to ask. Belinda.
Okay, thank you very much, Alastair. So, yes, we have been working in partnership with ECAF, with the GWCT and NIAB to look at conservation agriculture and how this is comparable against other farming systems. So what have we been doing? Working within part of the European conservation agriculture here in the UK. We've also been working in France and Spain. And what we wanted to do is look at a full cropping rotation, so a 5-year rotation here in the UK, looking at the conservation agricultural principles and basing ourselves in a serial rotation and understanding how that performs against other systems, so we could hopefully bring the data and the knowledge to support growers moving in that direction. Thank you. So what have we got? Here in the UK, we have our 2 sites. So we started in the autumn of 2017 at the GWCT, the Allerton Project at Loddington in Leicestershire. So this is a heavy land site, so predominantly clay-based, with a challenge of blackgrass control. So a lot of the decisions that are made at Loddington are around looking at how to manage the blackgrass in the system. And a high elevation site, so not ideal for trying to get reliable, consistent trials results all the time, but a very challenging and an interesting journey that we've been on there. Then in the autumn of 2018, we had Andy Barr, who came into the project and joined us, and his farm very much more a lighter land situation, so potentially the lack of moisture is the challenging aspect there for Andy. But both farms, before we started, had very much been working on sort of minimum till, direct drilling, and both sites, you know, we started in fields with a good soil health. So what were the 3 systems we look at? So the project we were working was on field scale. We weren't at small trial plot level. So Andy and his team carry out all the cultivations and operations for us on his farm, and the Loddington team, Ollie, the farm manager at Allerton, does the work for us there. So we've been looking at 3 systems in each field. So we've got 5 fields as a full 5 rotation. And we have a conventional where we have been predominantly ploughing, deep inversion plough. Our second system that we put in place was based around minimum tillage. So we were cultivating sort of 10 to 15 centimetres at depth. And then our final system is very much a direct drill system, particularly at Andy's where it is direct drill, occasionally at Loddington where it's been necessary, there's been a light till or direct drill. So those are the 3 systems that we have been working on. And this is the field rotation that we have. So on both sites, it's a 5-year rotation. As Andy came into the project just 1 year later, we've been looking at the 4 fields within that 5-year rotation and basing it really around 2 winter wheats, winter oilseed rape, and then at Loddington we have the winter high Vido barley, and then we have a spring crop of beans. And then at Lenham, instead of winter barley, Andy has spring barley and then either grows a spring or bean or pea crop. What we've also done within where we have the spring cropping, within the 2 min-till and direct drill systems, we've been incorporating the use of cover crops as well ahead of the spring cropping. Sorry, can you? So it doesn't, clicker doesn't seem to want to work. Okay, so as Alastair mentioned, we have collected over 80,000 data points over the 5 years, measuring a wide range of different aspects, from looking very much on the environmental side, but also the key part, the economics as well. So what we have done, this has allowed us to look at the cropping system through within the years, and then a 5-year overall summary. And this has allowed us to look at sort of the complexities and the risks associated with these different systems. So, for example, on the agronomy side, we have obviously monitored the crops from crop establishment. We've monitored the pests, weeds, and diseases, and taken then the crops through to yield. On the field operations side, we've been looking at the time it takes for each operational pass that we do. We've been measuring the fuel use on each of those passes, and also recorded the costs as well using CAAV costings. We've then looked at obviously the productivity, the yield outputs, and also quality traits, making sure that we're not picking up any quality changes through those different systems. And then this has allowed us to do an in-depth detail profitability. And we've taken grain prices on an average, but we've also then calculated results looking at a spot low price and a spot high price of that season. When we move on to the sustainability, most of the work that we've been working on has been looking at soil health, so all aspects of soil health, from biological, physical and chemical aspects. So we've done earthworms, we've been doing T-bag testing for the biological, we've been doing soil structure through VES, pentrometer readings, and we have also been measuring soil greenhouse gas emissions. So just as we haven't got a huge amount of time and we've got an awful lot of data, I've just picked out a very few key results. If we could just, sorry, thank you, move the slide forward again. So just looking at the environmental aspects on the soil side, earthworms, one of the indicators of soil health. We have recorded over the time of the length of the project that we are seeing consistently that the largest population of earthworms are being seen in the min-till plot, so that's the same Sustainable System 1, SS1 in there, and then the direct drill slightly behind that. And the thought behind the reasons of why we get that elevation within the min-till plot is that we have seen an increase in the undersurface worms, those endogeic worms, and the thought behind that is we're just doing a light cultivation. Perhaps we're taking some of the residue that's been left on the crop surface down into that layer where those worms are living, and that provides them a food source. And as I'm sure we're not that surprised, our numbers are lower in the conventional. And we also obviously see a difference in earthworm numbers. Loddington on the soil type there, we do generally see a lot higher population of earthworms compared down on the lighter sandier lands with Andy. So that was the earthworms. And then another interesting part of the project has been looking at the soil greenhouse gas emissions. So the soil scientists at Loddington, Dr. Jenny Bussell, and her team have been measuring the soil gas emissions coming off from the soil. The recordings are taken using a gas met meter and measuring sort of 6 points in time through the season at Loddington and 4 to 5 points in the season at Lenham. And what we've seen here is that we are seeing a slight reduction in the total greenhouse gas emissions. So here we're taking into account methane, carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide and coming up with a CO2 equivalence. And here on the graph, we can see that we've calculated this into a tonnes per hectare per year. So just on the caveat of that, we're measuring these during the day. We're not doing it 365 years. So what we have done is taken those snapshot readings and made those calculations to come out at per year. And also what we were interested to look at was actually the nitrous oxide levels. A concern if we are going into direct drill, are we compacting the soils, creating an anaerobic condition, and perhaps elevating the nitrous oxide levels? And that is not something that we've seen on either of the sites, which has been encouraging to see, but we naturally get a slightly higher amount of nitrous oxide coming off from the heavier land site at Loddington than we do at Lenham. And there, just on the right-hand side of that graph, there's a bit of an analogy of trying to give you a bit of a concept of what that tonnage per hectare decrease means. So we've reduced the gas emissions by 5 tonnes per hectare per year at Loddington, which equates to a 22,000-mile journey in a standard car. And then at Lenham, it was 3 tonnes reduction, which is the 8,700 miles that you can travel. But also alongside of that, we've been just looking at, there should be a build on the slide, thank you. Does it come through? Yeah, thank you very much. ECAF for us have been looking at the data and actually measuring the carbon sequestration, just doing a calculation on the organic matter levels on the fields that we measure each year, and looking at that, calculating from that or soil organic matter the potential sequestration that's in those soils. And you can see there on where we have the higher organic matter levels at Loddington, that potential of this sequester, where at Lenham, where we're conventionally ploughing and we've not adjusted those organic matter levels, there's a negative at that point, but positive for both min-till and direct drilling. So those are just a couple of examples of the environmental results that we've had. But if we just move on to the economics part of the project. Obviously, key is crop yield. At Loddington, because of the potential at Loddington, we can see that the yields are not as high as Lenham. But here, the graph is just showing you over each season the differences and that weather and seasonal impact that we see. And there are some years where we have had higher yields in a conventional, and there in 2021 you can see that was the direct drill actually then came out on top. But generally averaging the rotation over the 5 years, we have seen a slight decline of 7% in the yields at Loddington, but that's not the end of the story. At Lenham, you can see there that actually across the 3 systems there's been no difference in the yield output over those 4 years. You can see there the 21 where you can see conventional did drop back quite a long way. That was a challenge of cabbage stem flea beetle and dry conditions on the oilseed rape crop, and we actually lost the whole crop in that conventional, where we were we had maintained a good establishment, and we didn't get that damage. So we saw that coming into effect there. So that was the crop yields. And then what we have done is looked at the profitability. So taking those yields, and I say these results are looking at the average grain price for each season. So at Loddington, with that potential of not so high yields, we were coming in with just over £1,100 per hectare. Yes, we had a 7% yield drop, but when we look at the yields, and it depends on the crop and the crop price, we actually then looking across the 3 systems, the income was only about £45 per hectare difference between conventional and sustainable system 2. So the orange bars are the income, and then the red bars on the right hand side are looking at the input costs. Now, what we did, because we were really focusing on the systems, we maintained the inputs across all three systems. So the costings for fertiliser and crop protection are the same. Seeds slightly different because we're taking into consideration the cover crops that were put in for the System 1 and System 2. But you can see there how we have retained more of our profit as we go through into the Sustainable System 2. And then just to highlight the two bits of blue bar on the two sustainable systems, this is where we started to take into consideration capital costs. And this is something Gottlieb highlighted earlier about considering all our costs. And what we've done here is taken into consideration if we moving from conventional to sustainable system 1 Mintil, can we take a tractor out of that system? And we calculated that capital cost would be about £50 a hectare per year across the 5 years. And then as we moved into the direct drill light till system, we took out a cultivator and put that in at a value of £15 a hectare. Now those costs were done 4 or 5 years ago. They're probably quite different today, but that's where we're at. So you can see there that net profit of we're keeping 49% of that revenue compared to the 41%. But then when we move through to Lenham and the profitability that we're seeing from there. Sorry, I don't know if you can. Thank you. You can see here we're gaining a higher revenue. We're around over £1,600 a hectare. And then just you can see across actually when we get to the sustainable system 2 with the same sort of costings that we have got a greater proportion of that grain revenues being kept as net profit. And the costs associated with the growing are smaller against the yield and that revenue that we're coming out with. So just my final slide, and to wrap up, it was just to have a summary of more of these data points that we've had. So what we've got here, we have summarised looking at the direct drill sustainable, and we've compared that against the conventional, the plough, and looked across the 5 seasons at Loddington and the 4 at Lenham. So as you're looking at that graph, anything with a green percentage is a positive result to the sustainable system 2. So, for example, we've had an increase in birds. We've seen a decrease in the soil greenhouse gas emissions. Where we've got a red percentage, we've seen a reduction or a slight negative impact doing the direct drilling compared to conventional. But not much there. The crop establishment is one area that we're looking at, and what we are now doing, we've taken the learnings from this project and we have evolved it, and we continue the project in a new form, and we'll look at some of these areas that we've had some challenges. We will continue to measure the soil health aspects over time. 5 years is perhaps not long enough, so we hope to continue for at least another 4 years. And we are now starting to look more into the individual components around the inputs, from nutrient use efficiency to the starting including the use of biostimulants, the use of organic manures, etc., to carry us on this journey and move a step closer towards the sort of regenerative approach rather than just conservation agriculture. So I think at this point I'll hand back to Alastair.
I congratulate you on managing to summarise what is a massive amount of data into just 15 minutes and actually to explain it as clearly. So well done indeed. Now, somebody who is used to... And it's not just you that's had to deal with the complexity, Belinda, but one of our farmers here who has had to implement this onto his farm. And I'm going to ask Andy just quickly to say, before I go to the floor, Andy, what was it that motivated you to get involved with this project, which is going to cause you an enormous amount of grief in your farming system?
Yes, it does make some of my... sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. It does make some of the tractor drivers sigh a bit sometimes when we try and fit it all in. However, no, I'd really felt, I stopped ploughing in 2000 and we started direct drilling in 2010 after 10 years of Mintil. And really, when the opportunity of this came up, I thought, crikey, I made me a bit nervous actually. I thought, if I do it, have I been doing the wrong? Is it going to prove I've been doing the wrong thing for the last 20 years? So, but I thought I've got to be honest with myself and take the plunge and really find out. And I think sometimes you can kind of kid yourself if you believe something's right. But when I've got the GWCT and NIAB taking all the readings, I can't. There's nowhere to hide. So I wanted to prove or not, or perhaps change what I was doing. But also, I'd seen a lot of at that stage. I'd seen a lot of trials over the years where, as far as I could see, you'd done a direct drilling trial, but they tried to shoehorn the direct drilling into a conventional system, and then the results come out and say, right, you don't yield as much in direct drilling. Don't bother with that. But you go and ask the people who'd done the trials, and they'd done some ploughing, drilled in the middle of October, and done some direct drilling with whatever drill the farm had at the time, and lo and behold, they got a lower yield. And I felt we wanted to do something where we were actually trying to do it properly, and also I wanted to learn how to do it better.
So please take the microphone and ask the first question. Thank you.
Hi, this is a question for Andy. I was just wondering what's happened with grass weeds on your farm. Have they increased? Have they decreased? Or are you managing to control them well or not?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, that's one of the major questions we were thinking ourselves as well at the start when we did the Mintill, and we were told that there was going to be a grassweed explosion. And that's one of the assumptions that people were making before, plus the nitrous oxide thing, it's going to be worse soon. But in fact, that hasn't been the case. Certainly, they do measurements on all our plots with grass weeds, and it just hasn't happened. Now, I do appreciate that there's two sites in this. There's mine, the lighter land, and it's specifically meant to be lighter land, and then the heavier land at Loddington. And indeed, I've got some heavier land, and of course, as with any system, the grass weeds are more of a challenge on the heavier land, but certainly on the lighter stuff, it's not been an issue.
Were you surprised that there wasn't a greater difference in the soil greenhouse gas emissions between the systems? Because it doesn't seem significant.
Well, a greater difference in what sense? Less greenhouse gas emissions in the sustainable systems? Yeah, well, as it was said, there were only snapshot measurements on the one hand, and it's really difficult to follow and greenhouse gas emissions along the year. The main findings, I think, were here that there were no differences in nitrous oxide emissions. I think this is the most important finding of this project, as normally the absence of soil tillage and consequent anaerobic conditions are associated with higher greenhouse gas emissions, especially nitrous oxide. We found actually that improving soil fertility would allow for reducing nitrogen inputs, and this is also towards a way to reduce nitrous oxide emissions. So, but why they were not so big as someone would expect, I'm not sure about that.
No, I was just going to add, obviously we didn't measure, we know immediately after cultivations you see that burst, but we were not in the position to be able to measure that. So the measurements were taken during the day, so we may not have picked up such fluctuations, but we're still comparable against those three systems, so that may have contributed to the evenness.
Thank you very much, team. Really, really interesting. You talk about you're going to continue this maybe for the next 5 years, and you've gone from sort of a conservation project to maybe looking at how we're going to regenerate the soil. What will that slide look like in 5 years' time? What are the different things that may go on there? What are those metrics that you're going to be looking at?
Well, I think personally, when I've been involved in discussions in this, we've proved the cultivation thing. What we have found, we've learned how to do it better as well, which is another thing. So now we've got to kind of take that forward and say, right, we're not just setting out a trial that says should we plough or should we direct drill. We're saying actually we can make the direct drilling work, and there's all kinds of a million other reasons to do it now with carbon credits, etc. So what we're trying to do, I myself have reduced my nitrogen inputs, for instance. So we're going to look at different ways to fertilise the crops as well, and we put less on the soil and we put more on the leaf. And we've also been using biological products, so we're bringing them into it as well, and using different biological products. We can tweak also we've seen, you know, something I've learned that I didn't realise was quite exactly that I've reduced, you know, my establishment was reduced by 5%, so I can tweak that as well to try and get the equivalent establishment percentage. We're also doing one with farmyard manure, so we're adding manure every year into it now. We all think, or we know that that's going to hopefully improve it, but how can we do it that way? So that's the kind of things we're going to add in.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And this is, of course, one of the issues of doing a systems approach like this. You've got to be careful you don't change too many variables, because at the end of 5 years you can be confused about what you're actually achieving. I think what we've now got in front of us is a clear roadmap ahead. I think we can do something retrospectively, though. We were taking soil mineral nitrogen readings from each of the sites each year. We have that data, and we should look back at that and see how that might have influenced our fertiliser considerations. So I have a question here down in row 5, about 3-4 in. Lady with a hand up at the moment. Thank you.
I have a question regarding the VES assessment. It has gone down on the heavy soil and it has improved in the lighter soil. Did you find a cap? Like, was the soil capped?
No, what we probably ought to say is when we started the project, the VES scores from both sites were in good health. We were around the 2.5 on the VES scoring, and we continue to be in that sort of region. So the percentage change there is a very slight drop in the VES score, but in no way does it mean that we are being challenged by a change in our soil structure at all. It is still very good. We're still getting good VES scores. And similar with Andy, yes, we've got a 10% improvement, but we started at a good place and we are still in a good place.
Thank you for that, Belinda. Now I've got one more question coming, but after that I've got nobody in the queue. So if you've got a question to ask, put your hand up and you'll be next. Thank you, sir.
For Andy, you said you were anxious that you would learn that what you've been doing before wasn't correct. And I'd love to know what you concluded as a result of the journey you've been down. And was there any one thing you wish you had known before you started that you would probably give advice to say, this is one thing you really want to focus on if you're going to do this well?
One thing is very tricky. It's a million things. I mean, when I started, of course, you know, Groundswell hadn't started. There was no kind of community kind of doing this really. I mean, what I have learned is that I wasn't doing it. I have been making more money. It's very interesting that we get very similar yields from our winter crops. It's the spring crops we've learnt that have been much more variable. So it's how do we get around that, and we keep tweaking things. That's one thing I have learnt. You're always going to get problems with this. You know, we always like a simple approach, don't we? And you know, when my father was ploughing and then someone was going around with a power harrow combination drill, very simple. Everyone knew what they were doing, and this is much more complicated. What I've also learned is it's good to come to things like this. When I started growing cover crops in 2003 on advice from other people, but I stopped after a couple of years because people were going, what on earth are you doing? And I thought, yeah, what am I doing? I don't know. But then a few years later, you'd meet up with people like yourselves, and everyone, you know, you get a group of people who are thinking on the same wavelength. You think, oh, I'm not mad after all. I have learned that, I mean, on my soils, in my situation, the tine drills worked a lot more consistently than the disc, but the disc has got its place as well. You know, I've learned all sorts of things about cover crops that we never knew, you know, that there's all sorts of different species of, you know, we didn't know there was different species of radish and black oat and things like that, and they all behave differently. We found out that, for instance, we don't want to grow any cereals in our cover crops before spring barley because that has put the yield down. We got a much better result where we graze them with sheep or destroy them early. I mean, difficult to say one thing, a lot.
Just teasing a bit more out on the crop establishment. I mean, you've obviously you're including winter and spring crops in those reductions of establishment, and perhaps they were greater in the spring, especially at Loddington on the heavier land. Whether you can tease a bit more out for us on that, and perhaps also talking about the crop residue issue. I mean, Andy's mentioned his grazing with sheep. Did that happen at Loddington as well? And you know, how have you found the best way to deal with the crop residues?
Well, I'll kick off on that one. Well, first of all, let's deal with the crop establishment. And I've been messing around with different drills and different systems for nearly 30 years. And this result that we've got here is consistent with everything else I found, which you might say means, well, why haven't you learnt anything? And that would be quite reasonable to ask that. So what is it, do I think, that is causing that lower emergence? And in the early days, we had trouble with slugs. Some of the drills weren't very good at closing up behind. We learned how to deal with that by sowing deeper. I think there's some good published evidence, old though it is, that shows drilling at 40 millimetres as opposed to 20 significantly reduces the amount of slug predation on seeds. There's two things happening there. Getting the seed in deeper means that you get better seed-to-soil contact, which makes it more difficult for the slugs to get to. The second thing is the moisture consistency at that depth is better than shallower, so you get a quicker chit, which means that the seed is less time exposed to hollowing, because once you've got past the germination stage, slugs will really struggle to set you back with your total establishment. And then I think finally, yeah, it's probably has got quite a bit to do with trash on heavy land. Seed to soil contact with that trash there is difficult. So if you get through a dry period just after the seed's chitted, you get some desiccation from that. Whereas in the plough system, you've got much more soil there and less trash, and so that tends to be more consistent. That was the first part of your question. What was the other bit? Residues. I think I've probably dealt with that sufficiently, yeah. Andy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we generally have had more difficulty drilling in the spring, and we found one of the things is, you know, if you have a lovely cover crop growing, it's brilliant for keeping the moisture in, which has got good and bad points, hasn't it? Because when you're trying to drill in the spring, then you haven't got that friable tilth there. What we've been trying to do is improve what we're doing. So we were drilling with a Dale tine drill with two tines together, but we were opening more of a slot then. When we just went to one and on wider rows, we got much more better soil coverage, for instance, and we drilled deeper, and so we get it in and covered much better. What the residue in the spring has not been the problem really, because it just goes friable, and particularly if some sheep hooves are very good at straw raking. It's been in the autumn where we've had the residue issues, and we get round that with the tine. Or if we use a disc, we've got, so at the moment I've got an Avatar disc drill that we're using and a Dale tine drill. And if we use a disc, particularly after oilseed rape or something like that, I just go very shallow. We've kind of taken over from, we started with a straw rake, but that's had issues with pulling up stones and putting grass reeds around everywhere. We just go very shallowly, like literally 2 centimetres or something, just to break up the residue so you don't get the hairpinning. There's lots of discussion on hairpinning, and I was, you know, some people say no, it doesn't exist. To me, it's been an issue, but with the tine, it's not so much of one. So there's always a way, you know. There's always a way, and it'll vary. It'll vary on your farm. It'll vary on someone else's farm and different soils. But you can, if you've got different things at your disposal, you can get around it, I think.
What I'm asking is, would you be looking at comparing this data to possibly a rotational organic farm, which is like rotational ploughing on a 5-year term, so once every 5 years, compared to, I mean, obviously you're classing this as conventional, min-till, direct-till, but you are still using pesticides, you are still using fertilisers. So it'd just be interesting to see how a organic farm on a 5-year rotation, obviously still using the plough, would stack up. Is that something you'd be interested in doing or will be doing?
I would absolutely love to do that, you know, because there are so many complexities within this. we haven't got it in the system, and we don't have organic in the system, but we have been ploughing some long-term zero-till soils just to see what happens to them. And it's very interesting because when you plough a long-term zero-till field soil, a bit like maybe you might plough a fertility build in an organic system, you do get a huge release of CO2, and you also get a pretty big release of nitrate, much of which finds its way into the watercourses. So this really emphasises the importance of doing whole rotation accountancy, both for carbon, for nitrates, for nutrient, and for profitability across all systems, because every single system has its strengths and its weaknesses. And I'm afraid we don't have the resources in this project to do that, but it would be very interesting to do. Next question, please, from the lady.
Hi there, thank you very much. I was also going along the organic farming lines. Do you think that no-till and minimal till would work on an organic farm, considering how many more weeds we have to deal with, which is a problem with us?
Well, having farmed organically for 10 years and desperately wished to reduce the amount of ploughing that we were doing in the system, I would dearly have liked to have got to the point where we could. I found that heavy disking could destroy weeds as well as ploughing could, provided you did it in the right conditions. But there is another dynamic here within the organic system, because when you're not using fertilizers, particularly nitrogen, you need to release some from your natural sources in order to feed the crop. So part of your ploughing system is not just controlling the weeds, but also it's releasing your nutrients to feed the crop. Whereas when we move away from that system, certainly until we build the organic matter levels up so that they're providing natural nutrition, we need to use fertilizer to do that. I believe there is work going on, though, in the organic movement looking at this, and you might know of some within Europe that you might wish to comment on, Gottlieb.
Well, they started quite some time ago in the US at the Rodale Institute, trying to combine CA principles and organic. And there are also now approaches in Europe. For example, I know a farmer in Austria who is trying to do this, and but he struggles as well, of course. But developing a good crop rotation together with cover crops could at least resolve to a good extent the problem of weeds. But how to bring the nitrogen in, you certainly need to have a good leguminous crops within your crop rotation.
The elephant in the room is we're reliant on glyphosate for this, and so we've got to confront that. And because if that goes, so although I haven't farmed organically on the arable front, I have on the livestock front, but not on the arable front. And we've been trying to find ways of doing exactly what you're saying, really, or getting close to that. I have experimented with, for example, we got a crimper roller on the front of our tractor, a Horsch crimper roller, and then we put some wavy disc Vardestad, very shallow cultivation, but intensively very shallow, and we've killed off our cover crops like that, and that did a very good job. Although we would have to go back again and again, I think, and we didn't really need any. We needed not to have cereals in there because things like Phacelia and linseed and radish and stuff we were destroying. So we could get that really thick, perhaps, so we don't have any of the grass weeds, and then destroy it that way. I don't know which the. Yeah, we've got to work that one out.
Okay, another one coming here from the back, and then I've got one a bit further down towards here.
Two questions, if I can. First question is for Andy. What's your favourite cover crop mix?
So if I've been cover cropping for 15 years, I've probably had 30 different mixes, I guess. And I just keep trying different ones and different ones. Do you know what? On my farm, some things, so for example, sunflowers, I don't seem to grow sunflowers. I can go to one of my neighbours not too far down the road and he has lovely sunflowers. Mine come up in the crop afterwards, which looks nice, but it's not great for what you're after them. But so I've trimmed it down. I went up to like 15 mixes and things like that, and there's lots of evidence, isn't there, for different, the more diversity you have, and the better it does, and you've got lots of different roots, which is great, but a lot of them didn't actually grow. So I'm kind of honing in on things like the linseed grows, the phacelia grows, the radish grows, but don't put too much radish in, otherwise I get far too much. You know, the vetches grow, things like that. If you're going to pay for all this seed, I'm a bit caught in the middle. I know people get on very well with vast mixtures, but I just grow half a dozen that actually grow for me every year, and then and don't cost too much, basically.
Yeah, and my follow-up is you should all be congratulated for what is a great bit of collaboration. I would ask, are the results publicly available?
So far, there is information on our website and also on the GWCT one, but after today, we are going to make available a summary, good thumbs up, of all the results, because, yes, we've only got a very small snapshot here of the findings. So, yes, keep an eye out on the websites, and there will be more coming out to be available.
Yeah, thank you. Just looking up at your slide on the screen at the moment, your fuel use litres per hectare is down 44%. Does that include any applications of farmyard manure or compost or anything else? And also, does it include any drilling of cover crops and rolling of cover crops and slug pellets that go on after cover crops? Or is it simply a function of your work rate increasing because the ground is more workable?
So the fuel use has been measured looking at every single pass that we did. So yes, it includes the cover crops. And so it's every operation that was done, the spraying, the fertilising. Organic manures, muck spreading was not included in this project, so there aren't fuel costs there. What we were finding at Loddington, we're using about 60 litres a hectare of fuel from a stubble to stubble. In the conventional, and then we get that 45% reduction there, whereas at Andy on the lighter land, he's typically using around 50 litres of fuel a hectare. So I think that probably...
And this is including all the applications we're making as well. So we found, in my experience, when we went from ploughing to min-till, we halved our diesel use, and then we went... this is just establishment. Then we halved it again when we went to direct drilling.
Thank you, and I have another one there, please. After that, I'm waiting. This area is very quiet. We should have some hands from over there.
Thank you. Great set of results from 2 farms. I wonder, in a European context, whether we're seeing particularly the same financial returns or benefits from conservation agriculture. You've got members across 19 countries in Europe. You know, can you summarise any of that information, Godfrey?
Well, I just can refer right now to the results that were obtained on the 2 farms in Spain that were part of this project, and especially when it comes to both. We had also a very slight, I think, around 3% yield reduction, but in terms of profitability, there was also a very nice increase in profitability on both farms, even where we had lower yields. And I think this is all over Europe the case, and we hear from several member associations that cost reduction is certainly one of the drivers for those who practice CA. And especially, it's not only cost reduction, it's all about profitability as well. Profitability is increasing, eventually not at the very, very beginning, but over a few years when farmers learn better how to do the system, they increase also profitability.
Thank you, and another one from here.
Firstly, thank you all for the information and you're putting up here. It's invaluable to all of us. Andy, you've mentioned a couple of times on cover crops not having cereals, and I'm assuming oats in your cover crops in front of spring barley. What's the reason behind that? Without putting words in your mouth, is that BYDV, increased pressure?
No, I don't think so, actually. We've had... that's a whole new another subject, but the BYDV, but we haven't had a lot. I think it surprised me, even with the oats. We were, just on the trials I've done, I mean, this is not trials, I'm afraid, that have been measured by NIAB or GWCT. It's my own experience. And even when we've had volunteer wheat, going into the cover crops, or even when we've grazed them off really quite early, so you think it's not going to be an issue. We just seem to get a lower spring barley yield. Now, I can't tell you the reason, I'm afraid.
Crop cover, you talked about how it protects against erosion and insulates the soil. What about hot summer temperatures and what the heat of the sun does to crop roots? I saw Frederick Thomas yesterday. He was showing me some stuff that was, really concerning when you're thinking about climate change. I'd never really thought about soil getting hot. Any thoughts on that?
Well, definitely. I think I had it on my manuscript here to mention this as well, that soil cover, both through cover crops, but residues alone allow a much lower soil temperature, and this also contributes to less water evaporation from the soil. In this trial where we saw this reduced water evaporation, we also measured at the same time soil temperature, and it was several degrees lower under a thick mulch cover. And it's not only the roots, it's also soil biodiversity which is affected by extreme temperatures on bare soil. And this we have to bear in mind, especially until the soil is not completely covered by a crop. It's extremely important to have the soil cover by residues.
Thank you, Gottlieb. Okay, so as I bring this session to a close, perhaps just a few words. I think actually what's going to happen next is going to be even more exciting. We are going to be looking at some of the factors we've not been able to look at before. I also know that 5 years of zero-till does not perhaps deliver all the benefits that one sees in longer term. And when we get to 8 or 10 years within this, we will see yet further changes taking place, particularly within the soil, which I think will be even more advantageous to that particular system. So thank you very much for coming here today. I'd like you to thank our panel here for their presentations.